In a world of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And now, your host, David Knight.
Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Kurt Haskell. He was on Flight 253 from Amsterdam to Detroit, Christmas Day 2009. What happened on that plane, the underwear bomber, is the basis for all of the harassment that you go through every time you fly at the airport. The TSA body scanners, as well as, if you opt out of that, the pat-downs without a search warrant that you have to endure to go anywhere. But if we don't understand how we got here with this false flag operation, and he's talked about the suspicious circumstances of how this man got on board the plane, the suspicious circumstances as they brought out bomb-sniffing dogs after they all landed and were sequestered for an hour in an area where nobody else was allowed in the airport except for the passengers on that plane. If you don't have any suspicion about that, we're going to talk to Kurt. We were just talking to him about the actual event where there was the fire on the plane as he presumably tried to explode the bomb. But we're also going to talk to him about updates on this, because I'm sure that Kurt has been following this case for a long time. As he was saying, one of the most frightening experiences of his life, as he heard this kerfuffle going on, struggle going on in front of the plane, and then he went up there to see that the floor and a large part of the wall there in that row, as the man was hauled off, was on fire. And as he was saying, it was very unusual because nothing was being said. The guy just put him on in a headlock and took him up into the first class passenger section. So, Kurt, tell us a little bit about what happened. You said you and your wife were looking at the exit saying, well, if this plane is going to catch on fire, I'd rather die by jumping out of the plane rather than burning to death on the plane. It was a very frightening experience. This guy puts him in a headlock, takes him up. There's really not any discussion or yelling, I guess, going on. And then he disappears up into the first class section of the plane. What happened after that?
Right. Well, just to touch on that again, you know, if you're attacking a terrorist on your plane, are you going to put him in a headlock and haul him away? Probably not. You're probably going to kill him.
Right.
You're probably going to kill him. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So that in itself is very unusual. And eventually, after a minute or two, a flight attendant got a fire extinguisher and came over and put the fire out. But you have to remember, too, we didn't even know that this was a terrorist attack. We didn't know what this was at the time. We just had a man whose crotch was on fire. So why would anybody assume that it was a terrorist attack at all? It could have been who knows what, right? Could have been an electrical fire, could have been, I don't know, maybe he's lighting a cigarette and burn himself. Nobody knew at this time. So how it all transpired on the plane was very strange. And we didn't actually know it was a terrorist attack until after we landed, my wife and I. We didn't know exactly what had happened. So anyway, so
what did they tell everybody about this in terms of you know, the underwear bomber? What was the official story that came out? As you pointed out, it's very unusual that they wouldn't try to take this guy out, that they would just put him in a headlock and escort him to the front, hustle him off to the front. You know, that's unusual. But then what did they kept you for an hour, and then they had everybody move out as they arrested the other guy that the dogs identified as having a bomb sent on him. And then what was the next thing?
There's a couple other things that were kind of important. The man that put him in the headlock just happened to be a Dutch filmmaker who had just made a movie about a terrorist attack on a plane. What a coincidence. Really? Yes, what a coincidence that was. So
it kind of sounds like liar, liar, pants on fire, right?
Right.
Literally.
So we do an emergency landing in Detroit, and you would expect that, you know, the emergency doors to open up right away and we go out and shoot. No, we taxied right up to the gate, up to the terminal with a bomb on our plane. Nobody, nobody says anything about this. We all get off at the terminal.
Hang on. We got more coming up from Kurt Haskell. We're going to keep him right after the break. Again, you can find him on Facebook.com/Kurt.Haskell. That's KURTHASKELL. We'll be right back with Kurt Haskell. I'm David Knight. More details about this strange event that has been oppressing us now for a very long time. Welcome back to Real News. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Kurt Haskell, who was on Flight 253 from Amsterdam to Detroit on Christmas Day 2009. It was the flight that the underwear bomber was on. And as you've been listening these last couple of segments, Kurt has been going through the strange anomalies of this flight, things that you would not expect to see happen, the reactions that you would not expect to see happen, the fact that the guy who hauls him off in a headlock but doesn't stop him is a guy who is a Dutch filmmaker who has just finished a film on terrorism on a plane. So maybe we got snakes on a plane here. But let's get to Kurt, and if you want to tell us any more about that, I know that there's some updates, Kurt, about the underwear bomber himself, Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, I guess is Muttalib, something in terms of a lawsuit that has been filed. I know you want to update us on that, but I'll just turn it back over to you without any more introduction or recap.
Sure. So back to what I was saying, when we landed, we taxied right up to the gate with a bomb on our plane, and we got off the plane at the terminal, which is ridiculous. If you think about it, we could have blown up the whole terminal if this was a real bomb, which it wasn't. But even worse, after we get off the plane, then the pilot taxis the plane back out in the middle of the tarmac, and they take pictures of it out in the middle of the tarmac, to give to the media or whatever they did with those. And those are the ones you see online now. But we had already gotten off the plane at that point.
See, it really sounds like all of these events that the FBI has created, and it's all about, a publicity stunt. Look at this. We shut down this terrorist event. I mean, it looks very much like the other things that were done under Robert Mueller's tenure as FBI director. But go ahead.
Right. So anyway, this, Lori, my wife, and I weren't getting the answers we wanted. So I started doing my own investigation into what really took place here. And I did my own 2,000-hour-long investigation into this event. I talked to other witnesses. I went to almost every court hearing. I talked to the underwear bomber standby attorney. He got to be a friend of mine. And I got a pretty good idea of what really happened. And as the hearings progressed, the prosecutors hired two explosives experts to testify in the trial as expert witnesses. And both of them submitted reports to the court that the bomb was impossibly defective because it lacked a detonator. They tried to. That again sounds like an FBI setup, doesn't it? Exactly. They tried to cover this up and not let this get out, and they didn't want these people to testify, and they didn't want me to testify. At this point, the underwear bomber had listed me as his only witness in the trial. So, what happened? And again,
this would be important because you saw a guy in a suit. Try to get him on the plane, didn't have a passport. He goes back and gets authority, and they get him on the plane anyway. Guy in a suit and a guy who is dressed in a T-shirt and jeans and looks disheveled and is escorted there.
Winter, remember, this was on Christmas.
Oh, yeah,
and
true.
It was cold.
That's interesting.
He didn't have a coat. He had on a T-shirt, and no bags. Anyway, so the trial only lasted 3 hours, and then, like I said, I had been friends with the standby attorney for quite a while up to this point. We had talked, and he had told me that there were very lenient plea deals on the table. He said the government just wants this case to go away and get it out of the media, and they've offered very lenient plea deals. The underwear bomber has turned them down to this point. So then we get to the trial. The trial lasts 3 hours. It's supposed to last a month, and the underwear bomber pleads guilty to all the charges that require mandatory life sentence with no chance of parole. So, anyone with two brain cells would question then, why didn't he take the lenient plea deals that had been on the table? So I asked his standby attorney this. I met him, didn't meet him. I ran into him at another courtroom a different day, and we talked in the hallway, and he said, well, the underwear bomber had either been threatened or tortured in prison to force him to take that plea deal so that you would not get on the stand to testify, and these expert witnesses would not be called to the stand either because it would have blown the government case.
Wow.
So
wow.
That's kind of how we got to this point and why we didn't actually have a full trial on it, which we never really do in these sort of events.
Yeah, see, isn't that so typical of these events? It's always one lone shooter. Typically we find them dead at the scene, so there doesn't have to be any investigation, no trial, but we're going to suppress all the evidence anyway. But in this particular case, the guy is still alive, and they shut it down with a plea bargain, even though you were anxious to testify on his behalf and to tell people, look, I saw this guy being escorted on a plane in the middle of winter. He doesn't even have a coat. He's got no bags and he's got no passport, but they got him on the plane anyway. And he's got no detonator on the bomb either.
Right. And think of the story that would have made in the press if the press would have legitimately reported it. You know, I would have been one of the victims that he tried to kill, and I would have been testifying on his behalf. It would have been a crazy story, maybe unheard of. But that's what took place. And, now we're seeing the same, not the same.
We're seeing suppression of any investigation is what we're seeing. I mean, now the big story is we're going to investigate the brain of Stephen Paddock, who is the Stephen Patsy is what we say. And we're going to examine his brain yet again. They're flying it out. They're going to spare no expense to go through his brain to find a motive.
Right. They're getting worse. They're letting out less and less information. It's almost like they just don't care about the public at all, even seeing through what they're doing. I mean, this Las Vegas one is as bad as it gets. They're not even trying to release any evidence at all. They're just trying to brush it away and say, well, it's done. This was the biggest mass shooting in U.S. history. Paddock did it. See you later.
That's right.
It's bad.
That's right.
It's bad.
Now, is there a lawsuit that is coming, a new lawsuit from this individual?
From the underwear bomber?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he's suing the United States government now for his treatment in prison, which is interesting because when I went to the hearings, he kept complaining about his treatment in prison. So this is nothing new. It's no surprise to me. But what's interesting to me is that he didn't complain about getting threatened or tortured to take the plea deal. That's what he should be complaining about. Not whether he can talk to an imam or, has halal food or he's being exposed to pornographic pictures. I mean, these are his complaints. I read his 73-page complaint that he filed against the government. I read it all. These are the sort of things he's complaining about.
Where did this guy come from? Do you know anything about his background before you saw him? Did you investigate to see if there's any information at all about this guy and his prior history?
Oh, I investigated everything. His dad is a billionaire banker in Nigeria, one of the richest men in Nigeria. So, I mean, he himself doesn't have much of a history. Supposedly, he met up with Anwar al-Awlaki, and that's how he got hooked up in jihad. It's all nonsense, by the way. And he supposedly flew from Nigeria to Yemen just to get this bomb sewn in his underwear, and then he wore the same pair of underwear for like 3 weeks straight, supposedly. it's all garbage, right?
Yeah, he left the detonator in Yemen somewhere.
Yeah, he went through all that, but, they forgot the detonator, because Al-Qaeda can't make a proper bomb, I guess. They forgot the detonator, so.
Well, and that's the key thing, is that this looks so much like the 20 or so incidents that were staged by the FBI under the tenure of Robert Mueller, and now we see the same MO again, not necessarily of a terrorist, but of the FBI, and that's the key issue here, isn't it, Kurt?
Right. People think, oh, the FBI or CIA wouldn't do that, but not only do they do it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, what the underwear bomber event was a sting operation, which I would have had no problem with, except what they did is they should not have allowed him on the plane. They should have arrested him before he boarded. The fact that
and when you look at the Garland, Texas shooting, they actually hyped up this individual, and there was actually an FBI agent who followed him there, and now the individual who was shot, the security guard, is now suing the FBI for $8 million for pushing this forward. That's the one that got out of control. Thank you so much for joining us, Kurt Haskell. It was a very interesting, fascinating event, and for being an eyewitness there and having the courage to speak out, because people need to understand the MO of the dark state and how they push these false flags and push their products on us, their surveillance industrial complex. They keep pushing this on us. Welcome back. I'm David Knight on this Monday, October 30th, 2017. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we've been talking for the last 45 minutes to Kurt Haskell about the false flag attack of the underwear bomber. And folks, if you heard that interview and it isn't clear to you that that was a false flag, that they used that to push the body scanners and the pat-down searches on the American public, then there's really nothing else that I can say to you. I mean, if you can't understand that, then it's game over, because that is so incredibly obvious. And it should be obvious to you what is going on right now. What's going on with this Las Vegas shooting? What's going on with so many aspects of the surveillance state? There's a battle on right now, folks, that you need to get involved in, and that is a pushback against permanent authorization of this Section 702 that supposedly is going to give them permanent status, permanent legal status, even though it's a clear violation of the Constitution. We don't have a Supreme Court that is going to stand up for that. We don't have a Congress or a president who's going to stand up for that. You need to stand up for that, and you need to hold your elected representatives' feet to the fire and tell them to get behind this bill that is being put together by Rand Paul and Ron Wyden to rein in the surveillance state. These are powers that we have lost since September 11th, freedoms that we have lost, God-given rights that we have surrendered through apathy, through deception. It's not making us any safer. It never makes you any safer to become a slave. And understand that as you think that you can buy your safety and your security by selling off your heritage of freedom, you will just become a slave to the extent that you do that. Slaves are never free. They are never safe. They are never prosperous. So if you think you can buy your safety and security or your prosperity by trading off your liberty, that is the worst kind of deception. Absolutely cannot do that. I'm going to talk about that bill and why it is important in just a moment. We also have a quote here from Nancy Pelosi saying she is a master legislator. We're going to take a look at that profession of being a master legislator when we come back. Real quickly, I want to tell you about some of the products that we have at InfoWarsStore.com. That's what supports this program, this operation. I've been talking about the products that we put on a 50% sale. Of course, that is Winter Sun, our vitamin D supplement, and also Silver Bullet, our colloidal silver supplement. Both of those are 50% off, and both of those are going to help you to fight the kinds of infections that typically come during the winter. Both of those are going to help you to fight infections, but of course, there's other things that vitamin D is going to help you to fight as winter comes around. That's depression from not getting enough sunlight. Also having aches and pains from not having enough vitamin D. Weak bones, that is a sign of a vitamin D deficiency. So if you have a program, or if you're on a program of trying to make sure that you are replenishing and strengthening your bones, trying to increase the strength with the calcium supplementation, understand that it's not going to be effective if you've got a vitamin D deficiency. You can take a bunch of calcium and it isn't going to be assimilated, and it's not going to be assimilated. The nutrients that you take are not going to be assimilated into your muscles either. If you've got muscle aches, that could be a vitamin D deficiency. So right now, you can get Silver Bullet, 50% off. Winter Sun, our vitamin D supplement, that is also 50% off. And you can get 16% off Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink Mix, a great way to take essential vitamins and minerals. You just put it in, makes a great tasting drink mix, or you can make it taste any way you want. You don't have to swallow a lot of pills. You can get 16% off Vitamin Mineral Fusion if you enter the code VITA10. And it's VITA10 because just last week it was 10% off. Now they've increased it to 16.88%. So I guess we could almost say it's almost 17% off. Vitamin Mineral Fusion drink with the code VITA10 at checkout. Daily Caller puts it this way: the battle has arrived over the government's massive surveillance powers. Are you going to set this one out? Are you going to wait and say nothing as they take away your freedoms, as they spy on you, as they expand the surveillance state? And as a key part of what we were just talking to Kurt Haskell about, there's a lot of money in the surveillance military industrial complex, and that's what it's become. It's a big profit center for these people, whether they're selling body scanners or whether they're selling tools to eavesdrop on the American public, or whether they're selling software. Remember, that was the 4 whistleblowers at the NSA right after September 11th. William Binney, Thomas Drake, and others were saying, hold on, there is a big multi-billion-dollar contract that that they have signed on to that is going to expose your identity. Those guys had internally, they're all technical people inside the NSA. They had already come up with a system that was essentially going to keep people anonymous, but they didn't want that. Number one, they wanted to spend the money with their crony friends. And number two, they wanted to make sure that they could get that information about you. They don't want the FISA Act. And remember, when we go back and we look at all the JFK tapes and everything, we had in the 1970s, and the big part of the church committee hearings that everybody focused on was the information about assassinations. But the core purpose of that, before they talked to the CIA director, was to show that, and we got some clips, we're going to go to those in the next segment. I want you to hear from them yourself as to what Michael Hayden and others said about the surveillance state. But they had those hearings initially because they knew that the CIA and the NSA, back in the 1960s and earlier, as soon as they were created, these guys were spying on Americans. And they said, wait a minute, that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. So they had the hearings where you saw the heart attack gun that was held up by CIA Director Richard Helms and others. Everybody focused on that. They talked about assassinations of attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro, but they did not focus on the key issue, and that was the illegal surveillance and wiretapping of Americans. To stop that, they created the FISA Act, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I call it the FISA Act, that's redundant. It's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and there is a FISA court. And that's the court that, as Rand Paul has said, you go there and they say, I want a search warrant of Mr. and Mrs. America, and they give it to them. And so what happened was that tool that was supposed to stop the CIA and the NSA from spying on Americans without a search warrant became the tool to do just that. Isn't that interesting how they turned that around? And so now, as part of that, they've got a Section 702 of the FISA Act. And they say, well, this is created through congressional amendments to a prior bill that allows federal intelligence agencies to collect data on foreigners suspected of crime. No. As a matter of fact, what it says was you're not going to collect this information on Americans without a search warrant, and you're not even going to collect it on foreigners in America without a search warrant. So it has to be foreigners in foreign countries. They can't even be in America. If they're in America, you got to have a search warrant. But instead they do that. And now at the center of all this, we have seen this highly politicized surveillance state and dark state now unmasking individuals that were part of the Trump campaign and saying, well, that's okay, we can do that. Some people in Congress are starting to get the idea, and they ought to get it pretty quickly, that they are the prime targets of all this. And when we come back, I want to play a clip for you from Michael Hayden, who was the former director of the CIA, former director of the NSA, and he makes it very clear why they are doing this. We have the opportunity now to try to stop it. If you want to put some pressure on some of these people, if you want to support the people who are doing the right thing, like Senator Rand Paul, now is the time to stand up and have your voice be heard. We're going to tell you how when you come back. I'm David Knight. Stay with us. Welcome back on this Monday, October 30th, 2017. You know, we talked to Kurt Haskell. He was a witness, actually a passenger on the plane where the underwear bomber tried to ignite his bomb that didn't have a detonator. Set fire to his pants, the floor, the wall. And as he pointed out, they had a guy who took him off in a headlock. I mean, didn't try to disable him or anything, just took him off in a headlock to the first class section. It was a guy, interestingly enough, who had just finished a documentary about terrorism on a plane. So many different things about that were really strange. But of course, they shut down any trial where we would have any exposure of all of the anomalies that they had done, where you would not have testimony that there was no detonator, where you would not have somebody like Kurt Haskell talk about how this individual was put on the plane by somebody in a suit, and he showed up dressed down in a T-shirt and jeans in Amsterdam, where it was very cold. He had no bags, he had no coat, he had no passport, but they got him on the plane, and they got what they wanted out of it, didn't they? And this report from The Hill, new Trump security rules taking effect at airports. Yeah, they're going to make it even harder for you to travel. And they want to eventually put these scanners everywhere where you go in public, whether it is a shopping center or a public event or whatever. That's what they are rolling out. We've seen the NFL as a big part of this. And we want to get to the surveillance of Americans and what you can do about that. But it's very depressing to look at the news here and see that we now have even more security rules being put in by the Trump administration. U.S.-bound passengers are facing a new wave of stricter airline security measures, from tougher bag checks to questioning from ticket agents. Well, it's going to be real hard for me when somebody starts asking me why I'm traveling to not ask them, by what authority do you ask that question under the Constitution? I know you appeal to it for your authority, and then you completely ignore it like every politician from Hillary on down. Nobody pays any attention to what the Constitution says. They just appeal to it to rule over you. It's become nothing but a tactic. It's not a piece of law anymore. They say airlines are required to have the standards in place by last Thursday as part of the Trump administration's efforts to beef up global aviation security and stay on top of evolving terrorism threats. Let's understand that as Jonathan Corbett was exposing the garbage of these body scanners and how ineffective they were. He was an engineer, and he would show how they could not detect weapons if you put them on your side and so forth at the time, and how it was nothing but security theater. It was just there to make you feel safe. But of course, you're not safe when they take away your freedom. You're not safe when they take away the rule of law. You have to understand that the most dangerous terrorist in the world is a lawless government. Think about that. Don't give up your freedom for the promise of security. A lawless government that is not bound to any restrictions, that doesn't respect any individual rights, is the most dangerous terrorist you will ever find. Go back and look, and we bring this up when we talk about gun control. We talk about democide. Look at how many people have been killed by their own governments. Far more than you will see of foreign powers attacking us or terrorists attacking us. It's governments killing their own people. Democide, death by government. That's what you need to be concerned about. You need to be concerned about a government that thinks that it has the right and gives itself the ability to track you everywhere you go, to know everything about you. And if you want to talk about manipulation of the American public, think about the fact that the government is watching everything that you do on social media, and then they're following how you respond, and then they're adjusting their phony narratives to correspond to that. I mean, that is the depressing part of this. And of course, they say these policies are designed to replace an unpopular ban on laptops and carry-on luggage. So now they're going to be doing interviews and who knows what else, because the sky is the limit as long as you allow them to do this. Now, going back to this Surveillance Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Section 702, I just want to put this in context. Here's Michael Hayden, former director of the NSA, former director of the CIA, and he was at the Washington and Lee Law School, and he was bragging about why they did this. Here's what he had to say.
Guilt. In fact, let me be really clear, okay? NSA doesn't just listen to bad people. NSA listens to interesting people.
Yeah. Interesting people, and they all thought that was very funny. Interesting people like a presidential candidate. Interesting people like a president who would restrain their power. A president like Donald Trump. That's the kind of person that they listen to. Those kind of interesting people. They're not bad. They're just interesting, and we want to get some interesting information on them. And some of the legislators in Congress and some of the senators in Congress are waking up to this. Remember, even people like Lindsey Graham, who has not yet had a Kevin Spacey moment, when he kind of got some cold feet. Said, "Are you listening to me?" It's kind of like Dianne Feinstein when she found out that she was a subject of being investigated by the CIA because they had the CIA torture report. And so then they started investigating her. And we have seen in the past that the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover and others were coming after every politician. President Truman said they are trending toward a Gestapo, folks. They passed that point a long time ago. William Bennington, the NSA whistleblower, said this is far worse than anything that the Gestapo had. Far worse than anything the Stasi had. And he's somebody who knows. He spent his entire career as global technical head of the NSA, spying on these people. He knows what a repressive regime looks like. And he says the world has never seen anything like we have now in America. How are they going to use this? When are they going to use this? Are you going to stand up and say something about it? We have a bill right now. Senator Rand Paul and Senator Ron Wyden have introduced the USA Rights Act. USA Rights Act to protect constitutional rights of Americans. Will you take the time? I know everybody spends time on social media, and you love to argue with people, and you like to put memes out. Will you take the time to write a simple letter telling your senator or your congressman, I mean, you could do it electronically, but if you got somebody that's like Lindsey Graham, you might just mention to it because he's somebody who supports the military-industrial complex without any restrictions or exceptions. But you just might mention to him that he's going to be an interesting person. We know he's not a bad person, you can say. I know you're not a bad person, Senator Graham, but they find you very interesting. Would you like to not have a situation where somebody might blackmail you in the future? Would you do this to protect yourself if you won't do it to protect America? You can talk to your congressmen. You can tell them to support that act for their own good. Not just for your good, but for their own good. Appeal to their own selfish self-interest. Because most of these guys have got something that they want to hide. So appeal to their self-interest. You don't have to accuse them of being crooks or swamp creatures or anything. Just say, this is something they could manufacture if it becomes very widely known. Do something about it. It's very rare that anybody takes the time to write their congressman. And you can use snail mail to contact people who aren't your congressmen or senators. Usually they've got some kind of a filter so that you have to be in their district in order to send them an email, but you could send a snail mail message to somebody. It doesn't take that long. Take some of the time that you usually spend arguing about politics on social media and send a letter to these guys. You could create a groundswell if just a few of you listening to this program did it. Just a fraction of the people listening to this program, writing your senator and congressman, and they would get concerned because they don't usually see anybody take an interest in government. We all talk on social media, and they monitor us on social media, but they do it so that they can manipulate their story, and it's other people who are doing it. It's not the congressman. It's very rare, and it will really get their attention if you talk to them about it. And it's very interesting because when we look at this, we got in this article from the Daily Caller, they've got somebody who was in the Bush administration. He was Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, created by Bush. And he says, well, this Section 702 is a very effective program, and it can't really work if we try to exclude Americans' communications. Oh, really? Well, then let's scrap it. Because the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are far more important than your ability to know everything about me when you keep everything about yourself and the government and what you do in the government secret and concealed from us, and you lie to keep it concealed. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we've just had an update about somebody in the Trump campaign has pled guilty to a process crime. I'll get to that in just a moment. Real quickly, just want to let you know about the sales that we have at InfoWarsStore.com. I've been talking about vitamin D, our winter sun product, a vitamin D supplementation. The signs that you have a vitamin D deficiency are things like getting frequent infections, especially this time of year when colds and flus are moving around. You're depressed, especially in winter, or you're literally always tired, or you have joint pains, weak bones, or your muscles hurt. All of those are signs of vitamin D deficiency. And right now we have a great source of vitamin D. Our Winter Sun product is now 50% off. Our Silver Bullet, colloidal silver, is also 50% off. A great time to stock up on that. Educate yourself about the importance of vitamin D. You can't protect your bones or your immune system without having sufficient vitamin D. That's why these things happen during the winter increasingly, and it's why we call the product Winter Sun in the first place. So you can get 50% off Winter Sun, 50% off Silver Bullet. You can also get 16.88%. They've raised this up from 10% off. Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink at checkout when you enter the code VITA10, VITA10. Last week it was 10%. They have upped it to 16.88%. So take advantage of that while you can. The code is VITA10 at checkout to get 10% off Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink Mix, a great way to get your vitamin and mineral supplementation without taking a lot of pills. All right, let's go quickly to this new update that just came out. Ex-Trump campaign manager advisor has pled guilty to making a false statement. And again, this is a process crime. This is why I believe, and said so from the very beginning, one of the reasons why I believe that you had Bill Clinton meeting with the Attorney General at the time on the tarmac just before her deposition report by the FBI, her interview. That is a very serious crime if you make a misstatement to the FBI. And that is precisely why they've been conducting so many of these investigations. They want to make sure they can trap somebody in the details. It's called a process crime. And now they got one. Hey, we got one right here. A former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor has pled guilty to making false statements to the FBI after he lied about his interactions with foreign officials close to the Russian government. His name is Papadopoulos, George Papadopoulos. They say he lied to FBI agents about the timing, the extent, and the nature of his relationships and interactions with certain foreign nationals whom he understood to have close connections with senior Russian government officials. This is precisely the type of process crime that the special prosecutor was out to get. And of course, that was why Bill Clinton was impeached. One of the articles of impeachment was he committed perjury about something that was not a crime, his consensual sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky. Ken Starr stayed away from the bigger crimes, sexual assault, rape, and other things, financial crimes that they were accused of. Went after a consensual relationship and the fact that he was embarrassed and he tried to lie about his consensual relationship with Monica Lewinsky, and that was perjury. And that was what they focused on. Let's go back real quickly because I want to underscore how important it is for you to stand up and to be counted, to register your support for this bill, the USA Rights Act by Rand Paul and Ron Wyden. Let them know that just repealing a little bit of the surveillance state is something that is important to you. Contact them. It'll have a lot of weight. And let me give you another example. And of course, you've seen this clip before, but it's very important. Understand, this is Ron Wyden, co-supporter of this bill, when he got James Clapper to lie under oath. But of course, James Clapper isn't going to get a process crime like George Papadopoulos. James Clapper is out there still lying, not under oath, but he's still lying on mainstream media. This is the guy who lied about Dragnet surveillance, and nothing happened to him. James Clapper being interrogated, or not interrogated, but questioned under oath by Ron Wyden. Here he is.
I don't really know what a dossier is in this context. So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
Because he can't look at him in the eye.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not.
James Clapper, the consummate liar and bad poker player. Maybe he needs to play video poker, because he would never make it in a game with human beings. And then I want to go back and play this clip from Michael Hayden, the guy who was director of the NSA, director of the CIA, deeply embedded in the surveillance state that we have created here in America, and of course, an ever-Trumper. Here's what he had to say about the necessity of even having laws like the Patriot Act or Section 702 and so forth. Here's what Michael Hayden had to say about that.
Oh, your talk today about 215? 215 is such a safe haven. 215 is legislated by Congress. I was doing metadata collection under the President's raw Article 2 authorities from October 7th, 2001 forward.
Yeah, he says, yeah, 215, all this stuff, that's a law by Congress. Well, you know what? If Congress writes a law that contradicts the Fourth Amendment that says that you need a search warrant that is specific about the person that you're going to be listening to, why you are listening to them, where you're going to be listening to them, et cetera, and you go before a real judge, unless you get that, you're violating the law. You're creating a crime. But he goes, I didn't need any of that stuff in the Patriot Act. I didn't need any of that stuff that was written by the Congress that overrules the Constitution. I had an order from the president. See, understand where we are? That's the dictatorship that's been created. We not only have a police state, but we have a dictatorship in the minds of people like Michael Hayden, director of the CIA, director of the NSA. He doesn't need any law. Whatever the president tells him to do, he'll do. That should frighten you. That should even frighten the politicians. So talk about that. Talk about how they're going to be the first ones that are going to be targets of this surveillance state, as we've already seen with President Trump. And guess what? When the worm turns, the Democrats are going to find that they are also the subject of this stuff. And we all know that the metadata is the most important thing that they're looking for. You know, I think it's interesting in the amount of time that we got left. We now see this witch hunt going after George Washington. And remember, as they were going after the statues of the Civil War, began with the Civil War, actually began with Trump's UN ambassador, Nikki Haley. She saw a picture of a Confederate flag in the background of a heinous murder, and it's like, now that means everybody with a Confederate flag is same as this Dylan Roof guy. So we got to purge that. We got to purge the statues, and we got to purge the cemeteries, and we got to purge everything that has to do with that. And then they go after the other side on the Civil War. They go after Grant. They go after Lincoln. Then they keep going further and further back. Now it's Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, all the way back to Christopher Columbus. And of course, when this all began, President Trump said they're going to be coming after George Washington soon. And they mocked him. But of course, now we have seen multiple examples of that. And now George Washington's own church had a plaque in his honor. Now that's going to be removed because, of course, he had slaves. And so we see this happening. I just want to remind you, as I've said before, that Native Americans, or as Russell Means, who was called himself an American Indian movement, okay, he says, let's not confuse people because we've had Europeans who've been here for 400 or 500 years. So they kind of feel like they're native as well. So let's talk about American Indians to distinguish the different groups. So you want to call them Indians? Talk about Geronimo and the Apaches. They had slaves, didn't they? Yeah, they did. Did you know that even the Cherokees had slaves? They had black slaves, as a matter of fact. And we talk about the mistreatment of the Cherokees when they were kicked out of their lands in North Carolina and Georgia, the areas of the Appalachians, the Trail of Tears. They took their black slaves with them to Oklahoma in many cases. Did you know that? And so we've had slavery in every single culture. And we can eradicate all the information about Geronimo or Crazy Horse or anybody that you want to put up as a hero, somebody who fought for their freedom or independence. We can destroy anybody if that's going to be the measurement. And that's the measurement by which they're going after George Washington now. What you have to understand is that nobody is perfect. And we can oppose slavery, and we can oppose the legacy of that without throwing away the foundations and the culture that they left us, that was excellent. The best foundation for government, the best culture for self-government that we have ever had. But that's the point. That's the target that they want to throw away. It isn't that they want to purge anything to do with slavery. There was slavery in Africa. Certain African tribes enslaved others. And there was, as I point out, the Indians would enslave each other. They would enslave black people. They would enslave white people when they captured them. That was a very common thing. There's a long list of white people who were captured by the Apaches. As a matter of fact, if you look at the John Wayne movie, The Searchers, that was a well-known issue. I mean, they're looking for a young girl, and John Wayne is the guy who's looking for his niece who was captured and kept as a slave by the Apaches and so forth. I think it was Apaches in that movie. But now we're going to purge everything about even George Washington, because our society has to be erased because of the politically correct cultural Marxists. That's it for our radio broadcast. Thank you for joining us.